So, welcome everybody. My name's Darby Love, and I am a librarian at Nanaimo North regularly, and I'm temporarily in Parksville. So, if you're in Parksville, it was my idea to move all the books around, so sorry. Um, but we have these once a month, and this is our first one of 2025 virtual gardening series. We're pretty excited, April and I, to be partnering with these lovely folks from Vancouver Island Master Gardeners Association, or VIMGA. And I can't remember how long we've been doing this, but thank you so much to Jo Canning, who's got the braids there. She was instrumental in starting this partnership, which used to be in person and then migrated online during COVID. And we've turned it into this format, and then the video is available after. So if you liked the session, you can share it with a friend. You can go back and be like, what was that she said about Ginger? I don't know. I'm not sure what Dorothy's going to talk about, but I'm very excited. So Dorothee Kieser is our presenter today. But big thank you to Richard Bernier for wrangling all of us and being the coordinator for, I think, about the fourth year in a row. It's a big job, and it wouldn't be on at all without him, and we're very grateful. Okay, I have all of the windows open.
Okay, we have
Okay, so I'm from home and things are not where they're supposed to be. We're doing our best. So introducing Dorothee Kieser. She's been a certified master gardener for 12 years. She brings to these library events her scientific approach from her career as a biologist, as well as a wealth of experience from her own extensive home orchards, vegetable, flower, and rhododendron gardens. And in addition to her volunteer work with the Master Gardeners, Dorothee is also an active member at the Beban Learning Garden, which is a large local community garden here in Nanaimo, and it features a greenhouse, and they also plant cells. And she's given numerous seminars on many gardening topics to gardening clubs and associations. Dorothee is the president for the Vancouver Island chapter. Is that still true?
Yeah.
Okay, she's still the president.
Sorry, I'm the president of the Rhododendron Society.
Oh, of the Rhododendron Society. Great. There's a lot of things that you're involved with. And she's one of the chapter's mentors to new members and part of a steering committee who ensures high standards are kept for the basic training program at VIU. All right, and I see, thank you for answering the poll. Those of you who did, we can end that now, and we're going to turn it over to Dorothee. Welcome, Dorothee.
Well, thank you. April, can you remove the intro poll thing from my screen? Then I can actually see what vegetables I'm going to be talking about. There we go. Thank you for the intro, Darby. It's always good to do these talks because it makes me think about all the different topics that I want to touch on. And today I want to talk about growing unusual veggies. Now, what is an unusual veggie? For those of you who are at least temporarily in Mazatlan or more south, a lot of the vegetables that I'm going to be talking about are not at all unusual. But if you're on the east coast of Vancouver Island or other areas of Vancouver Island, and if you're in a zone like I am in Nanaimo, which is zone 7 or 8, then a lot of the vegetables that I do want to talk about is definitely unusual for us. But why do I want to talk about these things? Well, I want to talk about them because A, I find them exciting, and B, there's a good reason to think that we can grow things that we didn't used to grow. When you think of how much colder it used to be, and gradually we're creeping up, whether we like it or not, then you think we can actually grow some things. And certainly with a bit of help, we can grow a whole lot of things that we didn't used to be able to grow. So those are the kind of things I want to talk about. But having said that, in addition, not all the vegetables that I'm going to talk about are actually more southern vegetables. A lot of them are, some of them aren't. But really, when you have a vegetable garden for whatever you want to grow, I would say pick your favorites first. But then just out of sheer interest, and you should try something new every year. And so I want to talk to you about growing something new every year. So surely out of the range of vegetables that I'm going to present today, you're going to find something that might be exciting for you. So Darby is going to be my slide master. So if you move along. There we go. So just a quick recognition. As Darby introduced me, I'm Dorothee Kieser. I'm a certified Master Gardener with the Vancouver Island Master Gardeners Association. And we do these talks in partnership with the Vancouver Island Regional Library. What I wanted to say, though, is that this seminar is the property of the library and of VIMGA, and it's intended for educational purposes only. And the information in this seminar is as good as we can make it at the moment and as accurate as we can make it. But if something goes wrong and you've done something, even though I said so, it's your responsibility. Now, next slide. There we go. I'm going to talk about two things repeatedly. And that one thing is the complete organic fertilizer. So I'll go through that first. You can make your own complete organic fertilizer because all the plants I'm going to be talking about are relatively heavy feeders. And so you want to have some complete organic fertilizer on hand if you're growing them. And one of my favorite gardening books is Steve Solomon's book, Growing Vegetables West of the Cascade. And here's his recipe. So for nitrogen, you have 4 liters of oil seed, or if you don't have the oil seed, then feather meal or fish or blood meal is good. For calcium, you have agricultural lime and gypsum, but don't use dolomite. For phosphorus, you use rock phosphate and bone meal. And then you have trace elements of laundry borax and zinc sulfate and copper sulfate and kelp meal. And you want to mix that very well. And that recipe is good for 100 square feet. Now, having said that, I'm far too lazy to mix it well, get all the ingredients and so on. So I actually purchase good organic fertilizer. My personal favorite happens, and certainly not the only one, but my personal favorite is Gaia Green 444, which comes either in a powder or in a pelleted form. So that's a very good thing to have. The other thing that I will keep on mentioning is having a heat mat and having a grow light, because for a lot of the things that are from more southern climates, you need to get them started inside. Otherwise, we'll never have a growing season long enough that will actually let you ripen a lot of the fruit, or for that matter, the vegetables. So you want to start a lot of the things, and I'll say for each one, when grow light or early start inside is recommended. And the last thing I wanted to say is I'm a mixed metric and imperial measures person. So for the temperatures that are recommended, I am actually a metric person. And for the measurements in terms of size, distances between plants and that sort of thing, I am actually an imperial person, so it'll be inches and feet. Just in terms of, you won't necessarily write all this down, as April said, you can always go back to looking at the talk once more and then do a screen capture for instance, this recipe or anything else that you want to have a look at. With having said that, I now want to go on to the vegetables, which is the really exciting part. And I've ordered them more or less alphabetically. Sometimes my alphabet slipped a bit, but it really doesn't matter. So the first one I want to start with is achocha. It sounds a little bit like a sneeze, but it's a vegetable that's in the cucumber family. And it's actually a vegetable that has a range of uses because it grows so quickly from seed. It's an annual, grows so quickly from seed that by mid-season, it can make a marvelous screen, either as a shade for some of the other vegetables you might want to grow, or as a trellis that will protect you from a view that you don't necessarily want to have, or anything else where you need a bit of a shield to cover something. Having said that, you start the achocha inside, and then from seed, and then pretty soon you'll have that nice screen. And then once the little fruit that you see on the bottom left get to be, 2 or 3 inches long, when they're still nice and soft, you can eat them raw. They're quite cucumbery tasting with a bit of hint of green pepper or green bean, juicy, crunchy, absolutely delicious. If you let them go a little bit longer, then the skin gets a bit tough, but still totally usable. Then you just slit them open, take out the very interesting looking seeds. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture. And then you can stuff them with all kinds of good things and bake them, and it's still a wonderful thing to have. It's a very easy plant to grow, almost immune to almost any diseases and pests that are in the cucumber family. So it's an interesting thing to grow. Originally, it was found in the Andes and domesticated there for centuries, but for some reason, it's no longer found growing there. It was indeed an important crop for the Incas, and now it's widely grown in South America, Central America, and Asia. And I will be mentioning the seed company from which I got these seeds, and that's Cicada Seeds in Arrington, BC. You can Google them, Cicada Seeds. They have all kinds of interesting stuff, including one of my favorites that I've been harvesting even during the cold days recently, and that's perennial kale, a rainbow kale that comes in all kinds of interesting colors. So moving on from achocha to amaranths. Many of you will have seen amaranth in your garden. Oftentimes, amaranth is just an ornamental plant, and it's lovely. But even with the ornamental plants, you can eat the young leaves, and you can harvest the seeds. And if you don't harvest the seeds, then it's lovely for the birds in the winter because the seeds are very prolific. The only one word of warning, one year I put my spent flowers into my compost, and my compost isn't quite warm enough. So the next year I had an absolutely phenomenal lawn of amaranth in my garden. Not exactly what I had intended, but nonetheless. Then there's amaranth that's grown specifically for the seed, and that's what you see in the middle picture. And there's various varieties that you can get in the seed catalogs. And because it's a relative of the quinoa family, you would harvest and treat it like quinoa. Very good in terms of if you're wanting to have some extra B vitamin, because it's very high in that particular group. So from amaranth, we move on to artichoke and cardoon. There's some excellent blogs that you just have to Google and find. And one of them is from Sow Right Seeds, which is also where the left-hand picture came from. They are definitely a warmth-loving crop, and they need to be started indoors. At the beginning of the year, using a heat treatment of about 21 degrees or thereabouts. But having said that, in order to get really good germination, you want to cold stratify the seeds for a little while. So what does that mean? What does stratification mean? Well, stratification means that the seeds go through a cold period before they actually are happy to germinate. So what you do is you soak the seeds for about 12 to 24 hours between two paper towels, nice moist paper towels, making sure that the seeds are actually in contact with the paper towel. And then you put them in a Ziploc bag and you refrigerate them for about 3 to 4 weeks. And then you're ready to put them into a warm, nice seed starting soil. And it's important for many of these things to actually use seed starting soil, not potting soil. The reason for using seed starting soil is that it's much more porous. It holds the liquid better, but it also drains better, which is a bit of a contradiction, but it's still true. And so start them in seed starting soil. And then eventually, when you get a plant that's about 6 inches high or thereabouts, then you want to have a nice warm spot in your garden. And when I say full sun is defined as at least 8 hours a day. Soil is better if it's slightly acidic. And you want to put in a fair bit of complete organic fertilizer that I mentioned earlier into the planting hole. Well, eventually you'll get this nice nubbin of a flower bud, and of course you can leave it and get this thistle-like flower, which in itself is absolutely wonderful. But if you want to harvest it, then by all means do. But you'll only get a few flower buds eating buds in the first year. You're far better off leaving them for another season. So when it gets to be frost, you cut it down to about 6 inches, mulch it really heavily so that the roots stay nice and warm. And then the next spring, you'll have a more vigorous plant with more fruit buds, and that'll be a very nice harvest for you. And so I hope you have good luck if you're growing artichokes or cardoons. I noticed somebody put into the chat that they were actually growing artichokes, and I hope you had good luck with it. Moving on to asparagus. Now, asparagus is not a particularly unusual vegetable in our area, but many of you will not have grown it. But it is a worthwhile project, but you have to consider it as a project because asparagus can last up to 15 years if you give it the right condition. First of all, you have to choose the spot in your garden appropriately because, as you can see in the upper right-hand picture, it grows to be very bushy and would cover and shade a lot of stuff that you might want to have in your vegetable garden anyway. You can start the asparagus from seed, but then of course it takes that much longer for any sizable harvest to happen. Or you can start by buying crowns or getting crowns from your friends and neighbors. And crowns grow both horizontally and vertically. So you have to grow them A, at the right depth, and B, at the right distance. So when you do plant your asparagus crowns, what you want to do is you want to dig a ditch of about, almost a foot deep. And then you just set that soil aside. You put your organic fertilizer in, you set the crown onto it. Actually, one caveat, when you do have the complete organic fertilizer, dig it in a little bit so it's not too strong in any one spot. But put a nice amount of organic fertilizer in, and then you dig the next trench and put the soil onto where you've just put your asparagus in. And so, for instance, if you have 10 crowns, they should be a foot apart. So if you have 10 crowns, you want to have a 10-foot long trench. And if you're planting multiple rows, then you want to place the furrows at least 3 feet apart. And then in the first year, you really shouldn't harvest anything. You should let everything go into the greenery, so a lot of nutrition goes back into the crowns. In the second year, you can harvest a few, and then by the third year, go to it. And they have a life expectancy of 15 years, so it sure is worth the effort. Now comes a vegetable that I am particularly fond of, and that's broad beans. I know full well that broad beans is not everybody's gig. And when I'm at the Beban Learning Gardens and we have all kinds of broad bean seedlings in the spring, and I try to tell people, oh, you should really be growing broad beans. They really say, broad beans? But if you harvest broad beans at a very young stage, just as you see the seed forming inside the pod, which you see the pods on the right-hand picture, just as you see the seeds forming inside the pod, then they're absolutely delicious, and I grow lots and lots. But even if I didn't like to eat the broad beans, I would certainly grow them for the flowers. So what I do is I start them inside in little pots, and then as soon as I can work the soil, I plant them outside. And then by about end of May, beginning of June, I can harvest the first broad beans. By the end of June, beginning of July, they're done. But then, because like all legumes, they're nitrogen fixers. So don't pull out the root, leave that root in the ground. And so all those little nodules of nitrogen fixers will stay in the ground. And then because you're done by the beginning of July, you can use that space for any of your winter vegetables or things that grow pretty quickly and can still be finished by the end of the season. So well worth growing and absolutely beautiful to look at. Another vegetable that I'm particularly fond of is celeriac. Whoops. Let's see if we can get the whole celeriac. I'm so grateful to There we go, almost. So grateful to Darby that she's showing it to me, because we had all kinds of technical problems and I couldn't do it on my own screen. Obviously, celeriac is a very close relative of celery, but it has a slightly milder taste. And instead of eating the greens, you eat the roots that you see on the right-hand side of the picture. And just for a size comparison, I put my little kitchen knife next to it. Celeriac grows really well in our area, but it's very slow to germinate. So it can take up to a month for it to germinate. So what I do is I start in March indoors on a heat mat. And then once the plant is 6 to 7 inches long, and when the soil is a bit warmer, above 15 degrees, I'm thinking, then I dig the various planting holes again with putting some fertilizer in. And lots of compost if you can make it or have it. Or if you can't make your own compost, then buy things like steer manure or sheep manure or mushroom compost or something like that with some compost. And then eventually, don't know how close you want to plant them to begin with, but eventually the plants should be about a foot apart. If you grow them really rapidly, and hence the fertilizer and the compost, then they'll be very tender and absolutely lovely. And you can harvest them. As I say, I start them in March and then I harvest them in the fall when I see that the bulb, and you can see the bulb on the left-hand picture, when I see that the bulb is a reasonable size. Now they look pretty knobbly and gnarly, and how am I going to cook them and preserve them? What I do is I cut them in slices. I first wash them and brush them off so that they're reasonably clean. And then I cut them in slices, skin and nubblies and all, and boil those in slightly salted water. And when they're still firm but tender enough, then I take them out and I scrape off the skin and all the little protuberances and cube that little round thing, or not so little, actually. It's usually about the size of a grapefruit. Cube those and then put a mayonnaise dressing on and leave it in the fridge to marinate for a bit. And it's one of my favorite salads. And I see that Joe has said it's good in stews and everything, and I totally agree. And the foliage, of course, can be eaten too. But as I say, the stems are quite rough and woody and fibrous and not so attractive, but give a good flavor. And certainly the greens are very nice. Now, if you have trouble with carrot root fly in your garden, celeriac is also prone to carrot root fly problems. So if you have the carrot root fly and you cover your carrots with Rime, like you should, then do the same for your celeriac and you won't have any trouble with the carrot root fly. Now, moving on, we have the painted mountain corn. And I think that is an absolutely stunningly beautiful vegetable. Think of that, growing it for your Thanksgiving decoration, or just having it hang at your door because the colors are so stunning, and each cob is a little bit different from the next cob, so it's just lovely. But not only that, when you harvest all the little kernels and grind them, whether in your coffee grinder or otherwise grind them, it makes the most beautiful cornmeal, very tasty, very colorful, and well worth having. I don't have to say much about how to grow the painted mountain corn because it grows exactly like any sweet corn or anything like that. These are not edible like sweet corn. They're rough and whatnot. That's why they're good for cornmeal. Now we come to cucamelon, and cucamelon is another one of those things that is more cute and good for a trellis or something like that, or if you want to hide something. And because it grows really rapidly from seed, climbs up like nobody's business, and then makes these very cute mini watermelon things that you see on the right-hand side. Not particularly tasty, kind of cucumberish, but certainly not melony. But if you want to make a pickle, they're perfectly pleasant. I grow it more for the cuteness than I grow it for the taste of it. But if you like a little bit of a wall to it that needs a bit of covering, that's a lovely thing to have. Now there's other unique cucumbers that we'll see on the next slide. And we have to get Darby to move on the next slide, since I was so quick about, there we go. And so we have these other unique cucumbers. And on the left-hand side, you see the Armenian cucumber. It also has other names like yard-long cucumber and snake cucumber or snake melon. It actually is a melon rather than a cucumber, but taste-wise, it is indeed a cucumber, and you would grow it exactly like you would grow a cucumber, so I don't have to say a whole lot of extra about it. But I wanted to give you a little bit of history just for the sheer curiosity of it, because you probably remember that a famous Roman from the Roman era author, Pliny the Elder, described all kinds of interesting habits from his time. And so he describes how the Emperor Tiberius wanted to have an Armenian cucumber every day of the year. And so, of course, you don't get even in Rome, because Rome gets kind of coolish in the winter too, and cucumbers wouldn't do very well. But they actually made little movable pots on wheels, and they moved them to sunny spots. And in the winter, they made little greenhouses out of mica so that Emperor Tiberius could have his cucumber every year. But there's other cucumbers that are actually worth growing. So if you've never tasted lemon cucumber, it's well worthwhile growing, because it's not only cucumbery, but it's lemony, and it's mild, and it's burpless, and it's just delicious. I love them. They're about the size, get to be the size of a small apple. And so just lovely for a single salad. And the crystal apple is very similar. And also, as I say, growing wise, they're very similar to regular cucumbers. Now from cucumbers, we move on to edamame. And that's a vegetable that I'm going to grow in my garden, because I've never grown it before. I've grown it, or we have grown it at the Beban Learning Gardens here in Nanaimo, but we've never grown it. I've never grown it in my own garden. The left-hand picture is from West Coast Plants, which is another little nursery in Arrington. But the seeds are readily available from other seed catalogs and so on. And the picture on the right shows mature edamame. Edamame really are soybeans by another name or type of soybean. And you just harvest them when you see these nice little fat actual bean fruit, or seeds, I should say, inside the pods. And then you boil them in salted water and eat them like you would in a Japanese restaurant. They do need a little bit of extra warmth. And so you can start them inside, and that's a good way to go. But you can also warm up your soil a little prematurely. They take a fair length of time to mature. So if you want to warm up your soil a little bit, well, you say, how do I warm up my soil a little bit? Well, the easiest way is to put some black plastic on it and hope for some nice sunny days and warm days anyway. And that warmth will then transmit into the soil. So by the time you have a soil temperature of about 18 degrees, you're really good to go. And then cover the soil with a bit of mulch, like you see in Mariah's picture there. And also give them a fair bit of space. Make sure that the rows are about almost 2 feet apart, 1.5 2 feet apart, and the individual plants should be at least 3 inches apart. So keep them warm. Don't outplant them until the last frost day has been. And earlier somebody was saying about frost days. They vary quite a bit, of course, with where you are. But here in Nanaimo, east coast of Vancouver Island, our last frost day is May 4th. So that might be a useful thing for you to keep in mind, that May 4th is our recognized last frost day. Now we come to now I'm questioning whether this is actually a vegetable. Is ginger a vegetable? Is it a herb? Is it a rhizome? doesn't really matter. But indeed, we can grow our own ginger. And last year from the Beban Learning Gardens, I had some of that freshly grown ginger, and I'm certainly going to do it this year for myself. So you get from the any local health food store. So pick yourself a nice ginger rhizome and then rehydrate it in water, warm water for a little while. And while it rehydrates in nice warm water, then you make your potting mix. And they are a little bit fussy about their soil mix. So you want to have 1 part potting mix, 1 part compost, and 1 part vermiculite. So it's fairly light. And then you have your nicely rehydrated rhizome. And then you can either just put it onto the soil in a pot and just cover it ever so lightly. Other people recommend that you cover it a bit more. So you just have to try it out and see what works best for you. And after about 3 to 4 weeks, you should see some active growth. And by that, then when you have that active growth that you see on the left-hand side in the pot, then you can outplant it into a warm spot in your garden. Or if you have a protected spot, a cloche or something like that, then you can outplant it. Make sure that you give them enough room. So if you're keeping them in a container outside, the container should be at least a foot deep. It should have very fertile soil, lots of compost. And the other thing, because ginger comes out of a climate that's very humid, it loves to be misted in the middle of the summer. And then eventually, of course, the leaves turn a bit yellow-brown, and around about 9 months, and that's when you want to harvest the new ginger root. But in the meantime, you can also harvest some of the stems and the leaves and use them like you would lemongrass in your very favorite Thai and other recipes. Now, the next vegetable may not be that unusual, although I don't see too many people growing it in their garden. But it certainly does extremely well in my garden. And I make 2 seedings. I make a seeding very early in the spring. And then I make another seeding in, August-ish for the winter and for the next spring. This particular variety is called Kohlrabi, but almost any variety is lovely. Super Schmelz is lovely. The purple or green Viennas are lovely. The trick to growing good Kohlrabi is to grow them quickly. And that, of course, means rich soil. When I grew up, I have terrible memories of woody Kohlrabi, and I couldn't understand why anybody would ever want to grow kohlrabi. But now that I grow them really quickly with lots of fertilizer, lots of compost, it's an absolutely wonderful vegetable. But don't let them get much bigger than tennis balls, or they might not be tender. And so, as I say, 2 crops a year, wonderful. The bulb itself, of course, it's not a bulb, it's a stem part, but it looks like a bulb, is lovely. But the tender young shoots at the top of the bulb is lovely too. So try them as salads, try them raw, try them lightly cooked with butter. Wonderful vegetable. And from there we move to melons. And it's amazing how many different melons and cantaloupes we can grow on Vancouver Island in our zone 7 and 8. And I don't mean in the greenhouse. I'm talking about actually outside in a warm, sheltered spot against a nice warm wall that retains the heat a little longer. And as you can tell from the shape that they're related to squash, cucumbers, all these kind of cucurbiid type of family. But the real trick with getting all these things started, fruiting properly, is to get them started this early. So you want to start them indoors on a heat mat, and really when you look at the seed catalogs, West Coast Seed is excellent for giving you information, but many of the others are as well, or even the packages themselves. You'll see what the optimal germination temperature is. And for melons and cantaloupes, the actual ideal germination temperature is somewhere in the mid-20s, somewhere at 22, 23, 24. And then once your outdoor soil is toasty, then you set them outside and let them do their thing, preferably again in full sun against a nice warm wall or something like that. And also add an extra bit of lime. Dolomite lime is great. And then watch them grow into strong vines. You'll find that the male flowers come first. You could pick off a few of those, but obviously you need some. And then the female flowers will come along later. You might even think about hand pollinating some of them so that you get a better crop, because sometimes the bees don't seem to see them right away. And then the thing to remember is that melons and melons and cantaloupe don't ripen once they're picked. So you have to pick them at their optimal ripeness stage and then enjoy them fresh right away. Well, you don't have to do it right away, but pretty well right away. And cantaloupes are ready when you sort of touch them and you press your thumb into the skin a little bit. And if they have a bit of give and softness, then that's the ideal time to harvest cantaloupe. For melons, it's a little bit different. They have a bit of a tougher skin. And so you want to harvest your melons when the tendrils that help them climb, the tendrils closest to the fruit has dried out. And then that melon, that particular fruit is ready to harvest. So lovely melons between the sugar baby watermelons and various other cantaloupes, lots in the seed catalogs. And some of our local seed producers, when you go to the very seedy Saturdays or seedy Sundays, will offer you these seeds for these fruit that they've successfully grown in their own yards and are now ready to sell them. The next vegetable will be somewhat of a surprise to you, but well worth growing. Not only is it an absolutely beautiful vegetable when you see it grow, it has hibiscus-like flowers and a beautiful, strong greenery, as you can see in the bottom left, with the red veins in those luscious leaves. So something well worth contemplating growing. But it is a southern vegetable, so you have to start it indoors on your heat mat, and then outplant it into a sunny spot. Or if you have a bit of a greenhouse that's nice and warm and sunny, then it's even better. The recommended variety for our area is called Clemson Spineless, which is an open pollinated type, so you can actually save your own seeds. And of course, it's the seed pods that you eat, and they're absolutely delicious in soups and stews and gumbo. They're lovely in relishes, chutneys, and I've even had them freeze-dried as a crunchy appetizer. So you want to start your seed in early April with a heat mat and grow light so that you get good germination. And the germination ideal temperature is about 24 degrees. And then by early June, you're ready to outplant them in that nice, warm, sunny location with the soil being slightly acidic. And then it's important that, like tomatoes, that you get even irrigation and that you keep the soil well fertilized with compost and regular additions of additional fertilizer. And then harvest the pods when they're about 2.5 to 3 inches long, because eventually, if you let them grow too much longer, they would get kind of tough. There's all kinds of recipes that you can use. I personally like frying them, slicing them and frying them, and many other ways. They do have a bit of a slimy feel for people who are concerned about that, but they are absolutely lovely. Moving on from there to more spinach-like vegetables. And this is the one that I tend to grow because I find it the ideal spinach replacement. I love all kinds of greens, and I love all spinaches like Bloomsdale or others. But I find those regular spinaches bolt far too easily for my liking. So this Orach, which is actually a relative of quinoa, has a very, very similar taste to any spinach and can be used just like spinach in recipes. but it takes much, much longer to bolt. As you can see from the pictures, there's the red variety, and then there's the green variety of Orach. The green variety is more tender and more prolific and grows a little bit faster, so I prefer to grow the green variety, although I grow few red ones simply because they give a nice color contrast in my salads. My favorite way of getting an early green is to, in the late fall, broadcast the seed either in your unheated greenhouse or in your garden bed. Just broadcast the seed. And that doesn't mean, I agree that the birds like the Orach seeds too, but if you cover it with a bit of soil, it's not too bad. Anyway, then they just stay dormant until the soil warms up the next spring. I interplant my endives that I harvest in the winter, and radicchios and what other winter vegetables I grow. And I just leave the Orach seeds in the garden. And around about March, April, that lawn of Orach starts to germinate, and then I can harvest prolifically. And not only that, of course, when you have a lawn like that, you can take out every other plant, and then you can take out every other plant again. But then when I come to just a few plants, then I let them grow up. And as you can see on the right-hand picture, if you really look closely along the stem, you see little side shoots. And so if you cut off the top of the plant, or even go down one level to the next layer of side shoots, then you can harvest that. And then the side shoots starts forming. It's a little bit like sprouting broccoli, so that the side shoots keep coming and keep coming. And eventually the plant will have to make seeds. It can't help itself, and so it makes seeds. But in the meantime, you've had a long harvest season during which you have spinach, and much longer than you would have with regular spinach. Having said that, there's more greens that sort of serve like a spinach, and I'll show you those on the next slide, because there's more spinaches. Let me start from the right-hand side, which is the Malabar spinach. It comes from the Indian subcontinent and is used in many Asian dishes. It's comes in green and red varieties, and its leaves are sort of semi-succulent. So you want to have a warm spot, but you can see you don't need a whole lot of space for it because it's a climber. So you give it a bit of a trellis and it can climb up, and then you can keep harvesting and keep harvesting. You just have to be a little bit careful that even though it likes the warmth, it does not like full sun. And so if you give it full sun, it might suffer from sunburn. But a warm, well-drained, rich soil, and nutritionally is like many other greens. It's just a wonderful thing to have, and gives you lots of A and C vitamins, B vitamins, folate, manganese, and others. In contrast to the more tropical spinach is the Caucasian spinach, and as you can guess from the name alone, it comes from the Caucasus, and consequently is a very different climatic zone, and is very cold resistant, and is actually a perennial. It's also a climber, so you can keep supporting it, and it does need the support, otherwise it just rambles along and takes up far too much of your garden space. It likes fairly alkaline soil, but it's not particularly fussy about soil type otherwise, and it can even tolerate wet feet. So there's one thing though, if you belong into the group of people that have a gene that makes cilantro taste absolutely ghastly, soapy, and whatnot, the Caucasian spinach, even though there's no biological relation to the cilantro, has the same kind of flavor. So if you don't like a cilantro flavor, don't grow Caucasian spinach. If you like a cilantro flavor, then it's a wonderful thing to have and very hardy. And then finally, there's the New Zealand spinach, which I suspect many of you, oops, not quite yet, many of you have grown. I didn't used to like it, now I'm okay with it, but it's fairly high in oxalic acid, and so it's not everybody's gig. But it grows very well in our climate, and if you live close to the ocean and occasionally get some salt spray to your garden, then it's also a good thing to grow because it's very salt spray resistant. And another plus is that it's snail and slug resistant. So if you have those problems, New Zealand spinach, and you feel like greens, then New Zealand spinach is a good thing to grow. From that, we move on to the slide that we saw whisked by a moment ago, and that is peanuts. Who would have thought that we can grow peanuts in our area? Now, I don't think we can grow a tremendous amount of crops, but we can certainly try. And wouldn't it be a fun thing to do with your kids or grandkids to grow your own peanuts? I mean, yes, we think of them as a southern crop, but it certainly would be a crop that we can start to grow. So what you want to do is you get, of course, your peanut seed, and it takes a while. So you have to preferably start them indoors, and you start them. It takes a while for them to mature, so make sure you start them early enough because they do take 3 to 4 months to mature. So again, grow light and heat mat, and then put them outdoors when the nights are at least 20 degrees. Easiest way to get them to germinate is to put them on a moist towel, and then eventually, once it's nicely rehydrated, put it into potting soil, not, at about 1 inch deep. And once they've grown a few inches, then carefully remove them from the pot and plant them in a fairly shallow but wide container. It's important that you get the container right because you don't want to grow them in your regular garden soil. Preferably, you have a black container so that the soil gets nice and warm. And you want very fertile soil in your container and high in phosphorus. When I say phosphorus, that's the middle number on your fertilizer bag. You can see from the picture that it's a vine that grows from that peanut, but you don't want to stake that vine because you want the vines actually close to the ground, and you want them actually lying on the ground because what happens from the flower, it makes a little tube called a peg that drills itself into the ground. And then at the end of that peg that has drilled itself into the ground grows the peanut. So every once in a while, after about 2 to 3 months, you can waddle a little bit to see if a peanut has grown. And if not, then wait until the vines really die back, and then you can pull out the whole plant and hopefully harvest a nice amount of peanuts. And then, of course, you don't usually eat them fresh. You tend to eat them boiled in salted water, and it takes a while because you really want that salted water to penetrate through the shell of the peanut, and then it's quite lovely. So how wide, there was a question, how wide should the container be? Well, wider is better. So it kind of depends how much of a plant you want to have. But a big black, one of the really big black pots should do very well for a single plant. Now, how many of you, I wonder, have grown sweet potatoes, which is our next slide? They are actually a quite marvelous crop that does very well in our area. I wouldn't have ever thought so a few years ago, but I've certainly tried it. And a bottom left picture shows a raised bed in the Beban Community Gardens full of sweet potato. And sweet potato is actually, of course, not a potato at all. It's a relative of the morning glory. And not only is it a very pretty leaf, but it also has lovely bluish flowers. So worth growing for nothing for the flowers if you want. The trick is to get them started, and there's various ways of accomplishing that. In the picture on the upper left, you see a whole sweet, actually 2 whole sweet potatoes just laid on top of some potting mix. And that's a little bit moist, needs to be very warm. And after a little while, well, several weeks, you'll see these little shoots appear. And then you can just carefully remove those little shoots, plant them into more potting mix, and before too long, you'll have a whole mess of newly started sweet potato seedlings that you can then plant wherever you want. You can either plant them in a pot, again, a big black plastic pot is very good, or you can put them into a raised bed. Nice and sunny is really the trick. So warm is good, and then to get a good yield, make sure that the soil is nice and fertile, and make sure that you do very, very regular watering. There's a number of varieties. My personal favorite is Georgia Jets, which were developed in New Brunswick, despite the name Georgia, that are orange-brown skin with orange flesh. But another variety that was developed specifically for growing in Canada is called Radiance, another very nice variety. And there's another variety that does well here, and that's Covington. So you can try any of those, and they'll do very well. The trick with sweet potatoes, and you can start your own seed potato for the next year too, the trick for making sure that they store properly is that you need a special little growing area, or try that again, area where you can mature them. And that is, they need to be held at almost 30 degrees, so somewhere between 27, 28, 30 degrees for about 4 to 7 days. And during that time, it should be very moist. So you need to probably bring out your heat mat again, and put a little moisture or put moist paper towel or something over it, so it's nice and moist and warm. And then once you've done this curing for about a week or so, then reduce the temperature to about 12 to 15, and much drier. And that kind of curing will let your sweet potato last for about, 4, 5, 6, 7 months. In fact, friends of mine who are sweet potato growers have kept them for well over a year. So well worthwhile. Now comes a very strange vegetable as far as I'm concerned, and that's skirret. And the skirret seed, I talked about cicada seeds earlier. The skirret, they say, I haven't actually grown it, so I've seen it grown at the Beban Learning Gardens, but I wasn't there the day they handed out the the little roots, so I don't know what it tastes like. But it's said to taste like a potato crossed with a carrot and a parsnip. And apparently they're great roasted, but can be boiled, fried, stewed, you name it, even eaten raw. So it's one of the vegetables I want to try because I've never tried it before. As I said earlier, it's nice to try something new every year. You start it from seed, and as I say, you can get that from cicada seeds, and it'll make enough roots to be eaten by fall. But it's a perennial, and so you actually get a lot more yield in the second year, and they'll keep increasing after that. So once you have a nice set of roots, you can either just take a few off to eat, or you can take individual tendrils off and replant them and get more plants by the top of the year. So lots of reason to try these different things. I mean, anything that's a mixture of potato and carrot sounds good already. But we'll just see how well. Oh yes, the other thing I wanted to say is they seem to be a little bit challenging to germinate. And so cicada seeds recommends that they be sown outdoors in pots in the spring after the last frost date is over. And then they germinate pretty slowly and somewhat erratically over a length of time. So be patient. And it seems that oscillating temperatures are the key to getting these seeds started, cool nights and warm days. So keep the soil moist, and hopefully you can try this interesting vegetable. And the next one is one of my all-time favorites, and that's Tromboncino. You see that very long vegetable? That's me standing next to a Tromboncino, and I'm almost 6 foot tall, so you can see how long that fruit was. It's actually a cultivar of, or it's a summer squash, but the reason I like the Tromboncino so much is that it's a multi-purpose squash. it grows up. So it doesn't take as much room as zucchini or crookneck or the little flying saucers. They take so much room, while the Tromboncino, a single plant grown up on a bean pole or something like that, doesn't take very much room. And then you can harvest your zucchini-like fruit for a good length of time, all through the summer, basically. And then as summer comes closer to its end, then let some of them grow. Let them grow to this long, long tube. And what's so interesting is that that entire tube, until you come to that slight bulge at the bottom, is just flesh. There's no seed in it. And the seed is only at the very bottom where you see the bit of a bulge. Having said that, once you have a big Tromboncino like that, then if you want to keep them, and they do easily keep until next April, May, keep them at least at first in a warm room to let the skin cure. Just like your average winter squashes, they need to have a fair bit of warmth to let the skin cure. And then, so you let the skin cure and then put it wherever it's convenient for you. And then you can just slice off a bit, do whatever you want to cook with it. It's good grated, it's good in soups, it's good for whatever ails you. But having said that, then there's still a lot of tube left. So the next time you want Tromboncino again, you cut off another piece. The only word of advice is make sure, because it'll bleed a bit, and it's a very sticky, syrupy kind of thing, make sure you put something, piece of paper, something where the juice can dribble under the cut surface. Next time you cut something off, cut off the piece that's dried up at the beginning, it's just a little piece, and away you go. So it's just an absolutely marvelous vegetable, all-purpose vegetable. And just a couple more, and that is tomatillos. Probably many of you have grown tomatillos before, but my favorite is Aunt Molly's ground cherry. Lovely and sweet. It's an annual, and you start it in a fairly warm spot, and then in about 2 months you have a plant that's big enough to produce these little capsules, and it has the cherry, brown cherry, inside the little capsule. So you peel back the papery husk like you do for all tomatillos and eat that little sweet cherry inside. And if you don't want to have a whole lot of volunteers, make sure that you collect all the ones that fall on the ground. They're actually best, sweetest, and tastiest when they've already fallen off the mother plant. But do collect all those little ones that have fallen off. Otherwise, next season, you will have an absolute lawn of tomatillos in that place where you had the single plant before. The next one is turmeric. Who would have thought that we can grow our own turmeric? But we can, so long as we're patient and have a nice warm spot outside. It's a tropical plant, there's no doubt about it, but it grows perfectly well if you can give it temperatures of about 23 to 25 degrees. So to get it started, you can go to your health food store and hopefully find a nice juicy turmeric root with a lot of these little protuberances, which are the new growing tips. So you buy one of those, rehydrate it in nice lukewarm water for about a day, and then put it into a potting mix that's fairly low in fertilizer. You can even use coconut coir if you want to. And then you plant those sections of root into that medium coconut or potting mix and just lay it flat on the soil and cover it with just a little bit of soil, and then you water it well. You place the pot into a nice warm location. Again, your heat mat will be ideal to get things started because you want a temperature of about 30 degrees. You use a heating pad or germination temperature, but whatever to give it that start. And then after a few weeks, you should see sprouts. And then before too long, you'll have these nice banana-like big leaves. And then it will do perfectly well in a nice sheltered warm spot in our climate. So, and then just like with the ginger, the turmeric leaves are also very tasty, but of course the main crop is the actual root that's used in well, tuber that's used in cooking. Lovely plant, well worth trying. And then with that, I come to my last slide, and that's a surprise. Homegrown tomatoes for your Christmas salad. There are certain variety of tomatoes that can stand a fair bit of cold. Some of the there's many varieties actually, if you look around. My favorite are the mystery keepers, and my new favorite are the golden mystery keeper, but there's also Galena cherries. The trick with these keeper tomatoes is to start the plant about a month after you would start your regular tomatoes, and then put them into a sheltered spot. If you have a bit of a greenhouse, unheated is perfectly good. And then before it comes to real frost, then you harvest the tomatoes. And because tomatoes ripen for, well, certainly the winter tomatoes, I suspect others too, ripen from the inside out, and you can pick them fairly green and they will still over time ripen. So my friend Lisa Monroe, who also is at the Beban Learning Gardens, sent me the pictures from her harvest in 23. So you see she harvested quite a bit in November, and in January 2024, she still had a goodly crop of mystery keepers, and the others worked just as well. So well worthwhile giving it a try. If you, of course, they don't taste like a summer tomato. I mean, don't get me wrong, but the fact that you can grow tomatoes for your Christmas salad, I think is pretty exceptional. So give it a try. And with that, I'm at the end of my talk. And I don't know if there's still questions or if Richard and Joe and others have answered them all in the meantime. So I'll turn it over to our panelists, and I'll do what I can.
Great. Thank you for the presentation, Dorothy. So I, without my script, I forgot to tell you the structure that Dorothy would give you the presentation for an hour, and then we'd collect all of your questions in the Q&A. Because I normally handle that, so I'm going to leave it to Richard and Joe because I can't move anything on my screen or else you can't see.
Well, take it away, Richard.
All right, well, I'll come to the first one. Armenian cukes. Advice on when to start indoors. I would normally start cukes in mid-March at the earliest. Are they the same? Thanks.
I would say I would treat them exactly like other cucumbers, whether you're talking about the Armenian cucumbers. I personally start my cucumbers a little bit later because I don't have that warm a spot, so I would probably wait until early April. But if you have a warm enough spot where you can outplant them, then by all means, why not start them a bit earlier? Then you have a longer growing season, and that's just wonderful because you'll get more harvest. But every garden is a little different. Your little microclimates are different. So I would say start them when you start your regular cucumbers.
Next question is from Karina. Can you grow ginger as a house plant?
I don't see why not. It's part of the difficulty, and I mentioned that in my talk, at least I hope I did, is that ginger likes it fairly moist, and our houses tend to be fairly dry and usually drier than our outdoors. So if you're good about misting your houseplants, then I think ginger would be a perfectly good houseplant and actually quite pretty. But
the only thing I would add to that is
moisture.
just watch for spider mites if you've had it outside and you've brought it indoors.
But if you started it indoors, and
Wouldn't be a problem.
then you should be just fine.
Okay,
Someone asks, are melons similar to cukes in terms of doing better if cross-pollinated? Should I grow at least 2? Now, I thought melons were self-fertile, aren't they, Dorothy?
That's my sense too. but I mean, it's nice to have more than one plant, but I don't think there's any real need to have two plants.
Okay, there's also a question from Jen. Kohlrabi, in the second year I grew kohlrabi. They didn't form the nice heads that I got the first year before. By growing them quickly, as you said, means just giving them the plants lots of rich soil and food.
Yeah, I mean, years are so different. We all know that as gardeners, that you can't, something that worked last year doesn't necessarily work this year. So hopefully you'll have good luck again. Let me just tell you a little story. Some years I have enough beets to last me until the following spring, and other years I cannot grow a beet to save my life. And I suspect the same is true for kohlrabi. But luckily, so far, I've had good luck with kohlrabi, no matter which year I've planted them in. Some years better than others, but overall, I've always had good luck. So I hope you keep trying it and maybe have good luck again. But do make sure that the soil fertility is very good.
Well, isn't that the reason why we gardeners stay as humble as we do? You know, the vegetables
we're
keep
not
us
every so often, yes, and so we should we try something new.
We have a question here from Adora. Hello, I'm new to planting. This will be my first season garden. I also planted my plants indoors at the basement on 15th of December 24. I have peppers, okra, tomatoes, and herbs, but I found out that this was wrong to do since my last frost day is in April. She's in zone 7A. What do I do? Start all over or continue? For fertilizer, what is the best formula to use? Liquid, powder, or granular?
That is, I'm sorry that you had such an eager start. That's probably not going to be tremendously helpful.
Oh,
Really,
we've
those
lost.
plants are going to be leggy and likely full of fungus gnats and maybe aphids and whatnot. So I
Sorry,
must
Dorothy,
say,
can you
much
start?
as I hate to throw any plant out, it kills me to throw a plant out. But I would definitely recommend that she start again. As far as the fertilizer is concerned, I'm not particularly fussy. As I mentioned earlier, I really like the Gaia Green 444, but there's other organic fertilizers that do very well in the soil. But for planting. But having said that, when you want to fertilize your plants sort of mid-season, then I would suggest that you get some liquid fertilizer, fish fertilizer, or any of the other, preferably organic. I mean, I'm a great believer in our organic fertilizer. You can also make your own fertilizing teas by either putting a little bit of manure into a pail and then filling it up with water and harvest from that. Or you can use something like comfrey that is very nice in terms of making a compost tea. And so there's a number of things in the Beban Learning Gardens. We make seaweed tea that's very, very good for our tomato seedlings. So all kinds of fertilizer possibilities. But if you don't want to make your own, then I would suggest you do some fish fertilizer or something along those lines.
Jen, self-made organic fertilizer called mixed called for an agricultural lime. But for the melon, you said add dolomite lime. Any difference between the two?
Yes, and you've kind of put me on the spot, but it's, if I remember correctly, and I would have to look it up, so don't take my ultimate word for it. The dolomite lime is much higher in magnesium, and so
Yes.
that's a good thing for some things, but from a soil conditioning thing, it's less good. So when you look at the Steve Solomon recipe and he says, don't use dolomite lime, then that's the reason. But where the dolomite lime is recommended, then it's probably because it has those extra additions.
Question from Wendy. I grew edamame last year. Plants grew well and healthy, formed many pods, but the seeds did not swell in the pods until the pods turned brown. I harvested the seeds from the pods, but dry, hard outer shell. Why?
I don't know. Either Joe or Richard, do you have something?
It's been years since I grew any edamame, and I didn't like it much, so not a lot of experience. But anything with pods, if it's not swelling, then I would suggest it's gotten too dry, and so it's slowed down the fruiting speed, and it's taking the whole season to plump up, and by then the season is finished. So you may have let it get a little dry.
And maybe a little bit of lack of soil fertility too, to get
That's a good point, yeah.
Wendy, did you plant these in a pot or were they in the ground? Let's see if she answers.
in the ground.
In the
ground.
Okay. Well, it depends on whereabouts in the ground. If you had it in sand, just sand, then it would have dried out quite a bit more readily. Some compost in the sand might be a good idea.
She said she had fresh compost in there, but soil conditioning, so soil fertility, enough moisture and so on, hopefully would help you grow better. Edamame would be my guess.
And I think too, people misconstrue when you say, well, you add the compost and but it takes weeks for that soil to really condition, and that's why you prepare your soil ahead of time. And if the soil's been cold, then it's not going to release its nutrition, if you will. And so you really have to get that soil conditioned and settled in before it can really help your veggies.
Yes, and of course the moisture will help in that if you have
right, yeah,
not standing water by any stretch of the imagination. Nice even soil moisture.
Dora has another question. Can you also talk about companion planting?
I like companion planting not because I think the actual plants help each other, but because it really helps with keeping things like aphids and other things under control. A lot of the companion planting is really there to nourish the predatory insects that will take care of the aphids or other things. And so I do like companion planting. My personal favorite in terms of putting them all through the garden is marigolds and alyssum and also even dill and fennel and whatnot. All the plants that have very small flowers are really preferred by those predatory insects. And so if you do have an aphid problem or something like that, I definitely think that the companion planting of those things is an absolutely great thing. Some people think that it's the smell of those plants, but that keep the aphids away and so on. But my absolute favorite garden guru, Linda Gilkison, and if you haven't come across Linda's books, you should certainly pick them out from the library, says that the insects are much more in tune with scents than we give them credit for. And so even, amongst many things, they will pick out the scent of what they really like, and they will pick out the flowers of what they really like. So if you do plant the marigolds with their small flowers, or the fennel or the dill that really attract those insects, then it's more that than the actual companioning between two different types of flowers.
And if you want, you can plant flowers that you can eat.
Absolutely.
There are quite a few flowers that you can eat. Also, like nasturtiums. which actually are quite pretty. They do attract aphids, but the flowers are good to eat. Kind of a
Well,
sweet
actually,
taste.
we had some nasturtiums still in the community gardens greenhouse, unheated, last week. And before the cold came, we harvested a whole lot of the leaves, and many of us, including myself, took them home for the salads. And boy, was that a nice addition to a salad.
Yes, I think as lovely as the flowers are, I've always enjoyed the leaves, and even the stems are quite succulent, and they're a lovely addition to salads.
And if
And
you
as far as the flowers is concerned, I like having them in the salad as well. But I do take off that spur that's at the back, because that's where the nectar is, and that's where the little bugs like to crawl in. And I don't need extra protein in my salad.
the other thing is, if you let them go to seed, chances are you'll end up with nasturtiums next year also. I've had that in my raised bed, so
Absolutely.
yeah.
And the seeds are called false capers. Occasionally I've pickled them, and they make a lovely pickle, similar to a caper, but not exactly, not quite as good. But they're lovely to add to a salad, a little pickly things.
Well, the true caper is actually, as far as I remember, the growing tip of the whatever the caper bush is. So it's not a seed at all. It's actually a little growth tip that
Oh,
gets
really?
off and pickled. And so, of course, it's going to be quite different from the nasturtium seed, but either one is lovely to have.
So we have a question from Leanne. What is your favorite cantaloupe seed, and where do you purchase the seeds?
I purchased my seeds, as I mentioned earlier, at least I hope I did, at Seedy Sundays. Nanaimo has its Seedy Sunday on, I think it's the 3rd of March. Yeah, but you can Google it. And there's a lot of local vendors. There's one variety, and if I have it right in my mind, it's called Sweet Rock or something very similar to that. And it's my favorite cantaloupe to grow. Not terribly big, but very, very flavorful, and does very well in our area.
We have another Kelly Klein. What is a good melon for beginners to try?
If you want a watermelon kind of thing, try the sugar baby.
They grow really quite nicely, and you'll get just a nice size watermelon. They're so sweet also.
I haven't
Someone-
tried Montreal melon that somebody just put up but said it wasn't that flavorful. But as I say, I haven't tried it, so I can't comment on
I
it.
think a lot of it is the amount of heat it gets. Like I grew mine in a
Very much,
large
yes.
pot, a 20 or a large pot in the greenhouse, and they were quite sweet. Again,
That really is key in melons, and also in squash. I experimented a lot and found that the southern squash have terrible flavor up here. They're just not very good. And even the melons that grow better in the south, I love Texas gray watermelons. And I kind of just got, a gray oval thing, because just not the quality of sun. And so I can see why, Richard, when you're growing them in your greenhouse, it makes a big difference.
Mhm. We have a question from Kay. Does the Learning Garden have any mystery keeper seeds available?
No, we don't have any seeds available. We will have plants available.
Okay, we have a question from Mary Wilson. Have you tried sweet potato leaves as a green? I've heard they're good, but I've not had the chance to try them.
I feel like her. I've heard that they're good, but I haven't tried them. It might be something that's worth trying out this year, but I can't speak from personal experience.
Okay, now last question from She Dragon. How do you prevent lesson cabbage caterpillars?
Well, I would go out first thing in the morning with my espresso, and I would pick the caterpillars. The other thing that I did, and I had a very bad infestation of cabbage moth, which of course is the adult of the cabbage caterpillar, is that I got myself a butterfly net, and I'd go catching the cabbage moths every day. And it was even neater when they began to mate, because I could catch, they were distracted, and I could catch two at a time. And I did that. And the first year I had half the problem. The second year, I think I had 2 plants with caterpillars on them. So although I picked where I could see the eggs and stuff, I really found that catching the adults for me was a key, and I cured my problem in 2 years.
So how many plants did you behead while you were catching the cabbage,
I didn't. You kind of have to learn their pattern. And like flies, when they lift off, they lift up and backwards. And you don't go at them in the front. You come at them from the back. And because they're not looking, right? And you catch them from the
They're
back.
indisposed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Getting out there and looking is very, very important. But the other thing, and this is an aside, and I just want to say this as a kind of last thing, don't be too keen to get rid of every caterpillar. When you look at the overall things, we also have to think of feeding the birds, because that is the main nutrition for the baby birds, whether it's baby robins or otherwise, full of protein. So leave a few for the birds to feed their young.
Maybe we could just like pick them off and put them on the lawn, right? And point, food, right?
Right.
Joe, we'll have you do that.
Oh, okay, right.
One more question, I guess. Oh, just a thank you.
Well, thank you all.
And stay tuned. Next presentation will be on raised beds, how to construct them, hugelkultur, and just all the information you want about raised beds.
Yeah, we'll send out the recording maybe tomorrow, in the next few days. Normally we get it out the day after, but snow. So we'll do our best to get that out, and we'll send it out through the Eventbrite stuff. And you can definitely check the link that was popped in the chat. Thank you so much to Joe Canning and Richard Bernier for manning and womaning the chat and the questions, and to Dorothee for another great presentation. Dorothee's got lots of presentations in the backlog of sessions about food gardening. So if you enjoyed this topic, you'll probably enjoy other ones like my favorite vegetables and how to grow them and things like that. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and grow those peanuts. Yeah.